Now we're joined from Tel Aviv by Tom Grass, political analyst and longtime observer of Israel and regional politics. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Tom, let's begin with Vice President J.D. Vance's visit. What was the main message Washington wanted to send with this meeting in Jerusalem?
Well, as you know, President Trump was here in Israel a few days earlier, and then in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and he was hailed as a great peacemaker for bringing a ceasefire to the Israel-Hamas war, and he doesn't want to keep his eye off the ball, so he sent Vance to basically shore up the ceasefire and make sure the next steps are carried out, and also Secretary of State Rubio is also arriving today. I mean, one of the reasons is that Hamas has already repeatedly broken the ceasefire. They have not disarmed as they're meant to. They have not released all the dead Israeli hostages they murdered as they were meant to. And they have also launched an attack, killing 2 Israeli soldiers, wounding others, and then the next day more. So there's pressure inside Israel for the government to actually say if Hamas are breaking the ceasefire, Israel should too. And I think Vance came here to let it be known, be patient, things take time, give it a chance, step by step. And the Israeli government's going along with that. At the same time, it's like good cop, bad cop, because while Vance says slowly, Trump back in Washington is sending out posts on his Truth Social telling Hamas that if they don't disarm, according to the agreement, they will be obliterated.
J.D. Vance said Israel is not a vassal state. How is that statement being interpreted within Israel, especially amid growing domestic criticism of Netanyahu?
Well, I mean, Israel is not a vassal state. Obviously, Israel needs to have close alliances, and there is none closer than the alliance with the United States. And obviously, Israel welcomes American involvement and listens to America. But Israel and America have an alliance based on shared values, democracy, and so on. And Israel is no more a vassal state than Britain or France is. Any NATO member also has to take into account Washington's views and desires and wishes. But, unless every ally of America is going to be called a vassal state, then Israel also should not be called a vassal state. And in fact, Israel prides itself on not ever asking for American troops on the ground, that Israeli troops will defend themselves, will defend Israel themselves.
Mr. Grass, the proposed Israeli bill to apply sovereignty over parts of the West Bank has caused a major controversy. What is driving this political move now?
Well, it's not actually. It's a lot of fuss about nothing. It was the right wing and opposition parties trying to embarrass Prime Minister Netanyahu while Vice President Vance was here. They tried to rush through a preliminary bill to annex parts of the West Bank against the government's will. The government did not support this agenda, and it was like an unholy alliance between far-right parties and some opposition parties, like one led by the kind of renegade Israeli politician Avigdor Lieberman. And there will be elections coming up next year.
So why are they doing this?
To embarrass the government.
Why are they
doing this? The objectives are to embarrass the government. Exactly this. To get it spoken about as headlines on international media to embarrass the government. It has no practical effect, but they got what they want. They want to make life uncomfortable for their own prime minister because they are opposition politicians, and they are it's like throwing things into the air. It's a little bit like Britain and France suddenly declaring a Palestinian state. They don't actually think a Palestinian state is going to come about because they've declared one, but they are assuaging domestic politics for their own reasons to suddenly declare one now. So likewise, various politicians in Israel who are opposed to the Israeli government are doing this for their own political reasons. But in effect, it's actually meaningless. I would add that if and when ever is a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, they've already agreed to what are called land swaps and border adjustments. Both sides, both the Palestinian Authority and Israel, have agreed in principle to that. So parts of the West Bank are likely to become part of Israel, just like parts of Israel may become part of a future Palestinian state. The border that was drawn up in peace agreements that never came to fruition envisage land swaps really along demographic lines. So there are Arab Israeli cities in Israel that may become part of Palestine, and Jewish cities in the West Bank that may become part of Israel. But that was a consensual move. That's not what's going on here with a kind of bill about annexation.
Mr. Grass, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned this step could threaten Trump's Gaza peace framework. How might this affect U.S.-Israel relations?
I don't think they'll affect them at all, because this is not an Israeli government proposal, as I just said. These are some opposition parties who are just making trouble. Look, it's not exactly the same, but it's a bit like politicians in Washington having a government shutdown just to embarrass the president. It's political grandstanding. It's not very serious.
So the International Court of Justice's opinion calls on Israel to cooperate with the United Nations in delivering aid to Gaza. How is the Israeli government responding to this?
Well, Israel is delivering aid to Gaza. The issue is whether UNRWA, the UN agency, which Israel says is almost hand in hand with Hamas, and Israel says, and in fact it's been proven now, that some UNRWA staff members actually participated in the murders in Israel of October 7th. Others are Hamas
but ICJ
members.
denies, rejects Israel's claims about UNRWA being biased.
Israel says this is nonsense. Yeah, the International Court can say what it wants. I mean, it's there. It's not a secret, okay? Some UNRWA staff members on Facebook have openly said they're Hamas members, and indeed the Hamas website praises some UNRWA, they praise them for their what they call resistance acts on behalf of Hamas. So the ICJ can say what they want, just like the UN can say what it wants. It doesn't make it true.
So given the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, do you think this ICJ opinion could have any practical impact on aid delivery, or will it remain largely symbolic?
No. The only reason there will be a crisis in Gaza is twofold. One, because Hamas are not distributing the food and other items that are already there, because Hamas, for their own reasons, want to control aid and withhold from certain groups that are anti-Hamas, Palestinian groups. It's not a question of quantity of aid, it's a question of distribution of aid. Secondly is the question of building materials. So there is actually quite plenty of food and medicine now, but there is not rebuilding materials. And under the Trump plan, that can't go in until Hamas disarm, because what they don't want to do is supply materials that Hamas will use for building more tunnels and rockets and so on. So until Hamas disarm, there won't be any serious quantity of rebuilding materials. That is what is being held up. Again, the news media keep on talking about a lack of aid. There is no serious lack of aid in Gaza. That's not a problem. And again, just because the media keep on repeating it doesn't actually make it accurate.
Mr. Grass, what kind of domestic debate is unfolding inside Israel regarding UN agencies and their role in Gaza?
Well, again, what is UNRWA? We have to remember, UNRWA is a special UN agency set up for Palestinian refugees. All other refugees in the world are part of the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And UNRWA has a unique definition that says you are still a refugee even if you're literally 5 generations later. In other words, somebody whose great-great-grandfather was a refugee in 1948 is now considered a refugee according to UNRWA. And that would include, for example, Queen Rania of Jordan is officially classed by UNRWA as a refugee. And what Israel says is that UNRWA are part of the problem. if you defined as anyone who was a fifth-generation refugee in the world, i.e. one of your great-great-great-grandparents had to move because of war, then I think about half the world's population will be defined as refugees. And Israel says, you can't both recognize a Palestinian state, i.e. Western countries recognizing it, and say Palestinians in the Palestinian state are still recognized as refugees. And they say UNRWA, for various reasons, are an impediment to moving forward on the peace process. And I think the Trump organization and some other Western governments agree with Israel. This is nonsense. That's not to say there shouldn't be help, financial and other humanitarian help, but forever to perpetuate refugee status. So it's something you inherit from your parents, even if you now live in a normal house and have a car and whatever. It's simply,
Mr. Grass,
keeping the conflict going.
What will be the UN's role in Gaza?
Well, there are different UN agencies. There may be a role for UNICEF, and there are all kinds of UN agencies. It's specifically UNRWA, which is the main agency, which Israel says is working hand in hand with Hamas. Look, I'll give you an example. Since the ceasefire, Hamas have executed at least 100 Palestinians that they don't like. They say they're collaborators with Israel, but actually they're not. They're picking on people they accuse of being homosexuals, people they just don't like, people from rival clans. They're also torturing people, people have been kneecapped. None of this is in doubt. Hamas themselves have put out videos on their own Telegram channel as a warning to other Palestinian groups that Hamas are in control, don't challenge us. Now, how does the UN play into this? You have UN officials actually welcoming what they call Hamas's resumption of control when being asked, do you condemn Hamas's extrajudicial murder or shootings of people in the street? These are blindfolded Palestinians put on their knees, banned with metal bars, having big rocks dropped on them to break bones, and then sometimes shot. So these are the kind of UN staff we have on the ground in Gaza. And what's kind of ironic and ridiculous is all the Palestinians I know and speak to agree 100% with what I'm saying. They also don't like UNRWA because UNRWA is backing up Hamas. The only people who like UNRWA in Gaza are people who want to perpetuate Hamas's rule. And under the Trump plan, which is signed onto by many other countries, many Arab countries, Turkey, Indonesia, as well as Arab countries, Hamas have to give up power, or at least they have to give up arms and no longer govern Gaza. Under the Trump plan, there will be a new authority that will not be a jihadi authority governing Gaza. And
thank you very much for sharing your insights and analysis with us today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a good day.
After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay tuned.